So let's get started. Like the nice lady said, we are being recorded. This meeting is also being live streamed via Boxcast to anyone who would care to watch. And then please, I know it's been a while, but please remember to use that raise hand button while we're at least in the big room. You can find it in the reactions tab at the bottom of your screen, and then just click raise hand. So one other quick change that I wanted to bring up is that we no longer have Jesse offering us support. This is going to change a little bit how we do the breakout rooms. There won't be facilitators in the individual breakout rooms, but I think you'll be perfectly fine having those discussions, and then Shelby and I will bounce around to answer questions, probably pretty more similar to how we would do it if we were in person, to be honest. But we're grateful for Jesse, but he's got other commitments for the city that are taking his time right now. So we left off last meeting talking about mayoral powers. And I sent the minutes. We had gone into breakout rooms and the groups had come back together, and there had been some similarities between the groups, some outstanding questions and then some outstanding questions to be answered. And so I tried do my best to summarize what had kind of been generally agreed to include, what had been generally agreed to exclude, and a couple of items that were still left for discussion. This is open to change in case I didn't capture something quite right. But to go through, it sounded like there was general agreement to include that the mayor will preside over council meetings as the chair. That will include approving the agenda, determining the order of business, enforcing rules, and preserving order. It's a pretty standard charter language for the mayor. It also been found from both groups agreement that the mayor should be a full voting member of council, and that would mean that the mayor must sign all records of council decisions and would have no veto authority. And that sounded like there was general agreement that the mayor would continue to appoint committees with council by the rules of the council. Does that sound like what you remember from those conversations, that there have been general agreement on these areas? Seeing a lot of nodding. Great. So general, and we're going to go all the way to the right. Again, general agreement to exclude from the charter was that the mayor must countersign all orders on the treasury. This is a very outdated area in our charter, and there already had been an ordinance that was passed to define it. And then there was also that the mayor shall authenticate city officer bonds, also a very outdated element of the charter. And then we had discussed maybe including or adding a state of the city requirement. Some cities do have that, but there have been, it sounded from the groups that that was not something that folks wanted to include. Does that also sound right to everyone? General agreement on the left and the right? Awesome. So that leaves two discussion items that I believe are still open. One being the mayor serves as the blank head of the city government. And often in charters, it's the mayor serves as the political head of the city government. But it was brought up that Tigard's government is nonpartisan. So political wouldn't be the right word. Maybe it would be policy, visible, or elected. So continuing that conversation. Get started. Lindsay, please.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, I was just looking at that, and I don't know if there'd be any issues just to say that the mayor serves as the head of the city government, because it's all a little bit ambiguous in a way. Like, what does the political head mean? What does the visible head mean? What if we just say that the mayor serves as the head? But I don't know if there's underlying issues with that or it is too vague, but just wanted to throw it out there as an option.
Yeah, thank you. There is one underlying issue, and I think Jason's probably gonna talk to it. So please go ahead, Jason.
Oh, I was actually gonna say I can address that. I wasn't directly going to, other than I think the issue is that it causes confusion with the city manager acting as basically the administrative day-to-day operational head or leader of the government, and so that's I think where the rub or the concern comes. Kim, was that where you were? Yeah.
Yep.
What I was gonna say is, of the words that are up there, I mean, I I think of the words that are up there, the only one that I think really rings true for me and I think might not cause other problems is to just say the elected head of the city government. That's factual. It's not partisan or inherently necessarily political, though being elected is political, not in the sort of political party sense, but just it's a political action or political office that you're taking. So I would just say if we're going to use a different word, I would probably use the word, I'd suggest we use the word elected. But I could be convinced of doing something different too.
Thank you, Jason. Sorry to put you on the spot. Carol, please. Oh, Carol, you're muted.
Got it. I like the word elected too. I mean, they are, you know, ahead of the city, but the elected, I think, makes the difference between the appointed city manager and the elected.
Thank you, Carol. And Margaret, please.
Okay, actually, do we have to have just one? Or
You
can it be the elected and policy head of the government or the elected and visible head of the city council?
You could select anywhere from 0 to infinite words in this area. It's currently
If there-
not addressed at all.
If there's too many, I would say, you know, elected would be number one, but the second is also the policy head of the city government. Because that's basically what city governments and what the councils are supposed to deal with is policy, in my view.
Thank you, Margaret. And then I think, Carol, your hand is still up. Okay, I hear a lot of agreement around mayor serves as the elected head of city government. Does anyone feel strongly about adding a second word like Margaret suggested?
No. That's okay.
Oh. Karen, please.
I was just going to ask if we need the sentence at all.
It is not required. Jeanette, please.
Thank you. I too want to chime in for the word elected, and I'm sort of intrigued by what Margaret had suggested with policy, just because I know there has been some confusion that really council and former Mayor Snyder alluded to this, that really is the policy lead and the city manager's administrative lead, and it could therefore further cement that. But maybe look to Shelby to see if that's something, if there's any legal reason that we couldn't do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeanette. Shelby?
Yeah, so there's no, it's not a black and white legal issue. I think while council does set policy, the city manager in a sense does too. And so council sets the big picture city policy, but the city manager sets the policy that implements council's policies and runs the city. So it creates a little bit of ambiguity for me.
Shelby. And John, please.
Yeah, I would like to have something in here. So I know Karen questioned it and we don't have to have it, but back to Nathan's point for just about every week is what's the difference? What's the mayor do? What is he? Whatever he or she, who are they? You know, I think that's important that we state what they are or what their differences are. And so by stating that they're the head of the elected, I'm okay with policy, that's fine. I don't really like political, even though I see that in the majority of the charters out there. It's not something I really like. Visible is a nice word, but I don't think it really belongs in the charter. So I either go with elected or elected in policy, but I do think we need something just to show the differences of the mayor.
Thanks, John. And Margaret, please.
Yes, I had a question for Shelley when you were talking about the policy that the city manager does some policy. Does the policy have to be approved by the city council?
Generally, no. So like employment policies, the city manager sets entirely within their discretion. Any broadly applicable citywide policy that's applicable to staff as opposed to the community, no, it's not approved by council.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Margaret and Shelby. And Zachary, please.
Yeah, so I think that elected is a good word, but yeah, it should also be discussed if it conflicts with the city manager's role.
Thank you, Zachary. And Jason, please.
I think the problem with the word, it's not even a problem with the word policy. The issue we're struggling with is the word policy means multiple things. So, I mean, nobody really kind of pointed that out yet. I guess I'll just state the obvious. What's the city manager or all the, general orders to the police department or police officers, like those are all sort of policies of departments and of the city, and every employment organization has a bunch of employee policies, as Shelby was describing, but that's, pretty distinctly different from, in my mind, from setting the overall policy direction of the city, which is the council's responsibility and an elected role's responsibility. We just happen in English to use these two words to mean similar, but actually I think quite distinctly different. Like we're meaning different things. So I think that's why on some level there's a little bit of a struggle there. Shelby, that's got to come up legally a lot. Like how does this get resolved when people are using that same word to mean two similar but actually quite different concepts?
Well, I think what you were saying, we could clarify it, and we could say that the mayor serves as the elected head of the government, and something as well as policy, citywide or city policy, community policy, something like that. I think we could clarify that, use it in a different sense. So instead of just saying the policy head of the city, to clarify that it is the overall city policy as opposed to setting internal.
I mean, it's really the public policy is
right.
Really what it comes down to. Maybe that just solved it. I don't know. I hadn't thought of it like that before, but
yeah, no, I'm good with public policy, something like that. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Okay, so the proposal currently on the table is that the mayor will serve in the sense as the elected and public policy head of government. And Derek, your hand was up. Did you have a comment?
It was in line with that. I mean, the word political doesn't bother me. I think the word that we are I think we're conflating the word political with partisan for some reason. And I think that's the part that's confusing to me, is that the word political doesn't have any negative connotation to me. The mayor is elected via a political process, right? But partisan does have that negative connotation. So if just that color, I suppose, but nothing really beyond that.
Thank you, Derek. Okay, so I'm seeing general nods and consensus around serving as the elected and public policy head of government. Some other proposals on the table, but it seems like that's the general feel of the room. Okay. And then our second to be discussed item was the number of votes that the mayor would have on council. This was an interesting one that came up out of one of the groups, so I thought it was definitely worth at least having the conversation. It would be, I will note, deeply unusual for a mayor to have more than one vote on a city council. Jason, please.
I think this is a bad idea. I'll just state it as such. I wasn't in the group where it came up either, so I guess I should be a little kind to them because I didn't hear the context. But I think one of the more powerful things about being in the mayoral role or being a city councilor is that no one individual has any more power than another as far as a vote goes. I guess I was intrigued maybe to hear a little bit more about it if someone wants to share. I think there was a little bit shared before, but my gut reaction a couple of weeks ago and then kind of revisiting it tonight is that from where I sat for a while, I think it would be pretty problematic. And I think it would be problematic in the community too. But I'm open to hearing more.
Thank you, Jason. And Nathan, I wasn't in your group, but I believe you originated the idea. So if you want to take the floor.
Sure, sort of. It was never something I was proposing so much as just looking at this question of, do people really know who they're electing when they vote for a mayor, or what role they're electing? I guess as in the last meeting, as the meeting went on, there were also some questions of, there were at least one or two people who seemed at least interested in the idea of moving toward more of a strong mayor model. And this would kind of hybridize that almost. But for what it's worth at this point, I personally would not lean toward doing multiple votes for the mayor. That was the context in which it came up.
Thank you, Nathan. Of the three folks who currently have their hands up, is anyone in favor of more than one vote for the mayor? Nope. Okay. Derek, go ahead.
Just my contention, one person, one vote seems to be the principle that the country has. So I feel like we should continue that.
Thanks, Derek. And Margaret, please.
And I think the one thing about this, it makes a difference if you have 6 or 7 council members, if you've got, a mayor that has more than one vote, but when you have 5 total, that could really, really change the complexion of how people would vote. So, and I've never been a real proponent of a strong mayor council, especially in a city our size. But I think that would give just too much power when you only have 5 councilors. If you had 8, or if you had 7 or 9, that's a different situation.
Thank you, Margaret. It's good context. And Jason, please.
I would almost be more like, as I think about what might be, I would almost be more in favor of, instead of 2 votes, if we're wanting to give some additional power, and we keep the 4 councilors, 1 mayor, some form of a veto with a 4, an ability of 4 councilors to override the veto. I don't know. I'm not even sure that's a good idea. I just would more be willing to entertain that than I would be to giving 2 votes, I think.
Yeah, this had actually come up in our internal discussion that the power to veto can essentially be multiple votes, depending on the context of the number of councilors that you have. Like I said, in Oregon, it is deeply unusual to both have a vote on council and to have the veto power, but that doesn't mean it's not something that we could do. But I think the group had generally decided to not have the veto, but definitely open. Zachary, please.
Oh yeah, by the way, I had a keyboard and I thought it was like in the way so you guys could saw it. So I tried to pull it away and then like my camera flopped down real quick. It's kind of embarrassing. But anyway, about the issue, it's all settled now. I think that, some sort of truth does lie in like what we discussed earlier, because it didn't just pop up for no reason. Because we do think about like the structure of mayor and like to what extent, should there be more mayoral powers or, to keep it the same. And we do have a really unique opportunity here to change it. So I think that it's at least a good idea to look at all the different perspectives that way. Not that we're not already doing that, but, rather than just jumping to what we're normally used to.
Yeah, thank you, Zachary, and appreciate that. I appreciate the discussion this evening. It does sound like there is general consensus that the number of votes of the mayor will be 1.
Mhm.
Okay, or at least the recommendation from this group. Right, so I'm just going to remove this. So this would be our current proposal. Is anybody in disagreement about anything on these 2 lists? All right, so if I can get everyone to nod that these are the recommendations of mayoral powers going forward.
Mm.
Right. And Shelby, is that good? All right, so this does mean that you'll have a much more interesting charter shell to start reviewing. There will be some new things that are going to get added in going forward. All right, so going on to our next topic, this is mayoral selection and term length. So when we talk about mayoral selection, this is the idea of it being an at-large position versus some other selection method. In Oregon, mayors are generally selected at large, but you may have noticed in the original Tigard City Charter, that was not the case. They were in fact voted on by the council out of the council members. So it was a little bit different. But that's really not the case anymore. Generally, mayors are selected at large from the city. And then this is probably the lamest slide I've ever made. Oh, Karen, go ahead.
When you mentioned the shell document, again, I realized that you have a pink highlight in there as something to talk about during mayoral powers, and that's signing ordinances after they've been passed. So I don't know if we want to wrap that up before moving on or come back to it.
Yeah, great eye. So that was a requirement that the mayor signs ordinances when they are passed, and that has to do with the veto authority. So that wording would have been changed if this group had recommended that the mayor had veto, because then it wouldn't have been mayor must sign all records of council. So now that that has been clarified from our previous discussion, Shelby can go ahead and remove my little highlights and we'll move forward. Does that clarify everything? Awesome. So mayoral selection being at large generally, and then please don't judge me for this slide. This is more notes for myself, but in Oregon, we have 8 cities with 2-year terms for mayor and 21 cities with 4-year terms for mayor. Most cities also have 4-year terms for the councilors, so it does have parity between councilor and mayor. There's not a lot of advantages to having a 2-year mayor that I see, other than because councilors are elected usually staggered, it would give all councilors an opportunity to run for mayor at the end of their term. But that would really be the only benefit. Otherwise, you're unless you really feel that the mayor should have a 2-year term rather than a 4. But John, please.
Yeah, Tigard used to have a 2-year, and we removed that, and most other cities have removed their 2 and all gone to 4. There are a few around still, Cornelius, and there's a couple of that are local. But for the most part, the other reason to do it, which I don't really like, is it allows you to turn over the majority of the council people. So if you have 2 councilors each year and the mayor every other election, you can really only take over the council or get the majority of the votes every other election. Where the ones that do it, you're allowed actually to get a majority of people to run and take over control of that in the election. I don't like that, but I'm saying that is the other reason why people like it.
Thank you for that context, John. Appreciate it. So and Jason, please.
Just some other context too for the cities that there are actually quite a few cities locally that do have the mayor be selected by the council, but they're all pretty small cities. But I just wanted to kind of give you like King City and Durham, both our neighbors, both have that type of provision in their selection. But in cities larger in size like ours, I would agree it's pretty unusual locally, though there are a lot of just as many strong mayors as there are all over the country. There are lots of city councils of large cities, even in California, where the council selects the mayor and they serve for 1 year and then it changes over and they actually rotate it through the whole council. So everyone's mayor. I think there's a lot of problems with that, and I'm not suggesting that. I just want to give everybody kind of the full look at what that is sort of like locally and nationally.
Appreciate that. Thank you, Jason. And John, please.
Yeah, Bend was the last large city to remove that, where the council voted for it. They did theirs about 5 or 6 years ago. They removed that from their charter. But every other city that does do it is like 5,000 or less. So it's nothing of any city of size that does it.
I did stop reading charters once I hit populations below 20,000, and that's when I didn't see any that weren't at large at that point. And Jeanette, please.
Yeah, and I would applaud the change from a 2-year to 4-year. I think a 2-year doesn't give you enough time to learn, and also doesn't give you a long time perspective or horizon. Whereas if you have a 4-year, you've learned a lot about the council and you're looking ahead and hopefully moving the city forward, as opposed to either thinking about running, or if your term limit's up, you can't. But that would be just my perspective.
Thank you. And Jason, please.
On Jeanette's point, I'll just be honest, for the folks that have never been elected officials here, it takes you 18 months to 24 months to figure out what you're even doing. I'm just going to be realistic with all of you, even if you've been on the planning commission, even if maybe Margaret Doherty would be an exception. It might take her 12 months or 8 months or something, but that's just reality. The average person, it's taken 18 to 24 months to be effective and figure out what you're doing.
Thank you for that context and honesty. And Zachary, please.
So I know that the 4-year does seem like a general consensus, like people are more supporting of that. But I do want to give the 2-year some credit, because even though it doesn't seem like the 2-year, would be that good, because it's a faster turnover rate and stuff, I do feel like with the 2-year, it's going to help with people who want to get a tryout for mayor and don't want to have to be locked in a 4-year commitment, where they might have, because they can resign at any time, but it obviously looks a lot worse if you resign mid-term rather than just waiting out your term, because you want to show the city that you care, but you also sometimes might not know fully what you're getting into as a elected position. So I feel like a faster turnover rate should be better too. And then also people will get elections during midterms and presidential 4-year elections, hopefully, which could help, or whenever the designated date is, so that if they feel like, oh, my mayor didn't really do much this 2-year term, well, you can vote for a different one.
It does allow for faster cycling. I think I'll push back that I think most people who are running for mayor know exactly what they're getting into. I think most Tigard mayors have been previously served as city councilors. But it could happen. So hi John, I think you knew what you were getting into though, just a little bit. So when it comes to selection, is there anyone who feels that they would like to move away from at-large selection of the mayor? So is there general agreement that we remain a mayor elected at-large city? Okay. Does anyone feel that the term should be different than the current 4-year mayoral term? Zachary, do you feel that you would prefer a 2-year term? Because we can take this to the vote.
I would at least give it some sort of validity, because I don't know. We'll look at elections, right? And we'll see people that are running for president and stuff. And although there's some younger people, I'm sure that it would also help is a better booster on the resumes and stuff if they could do a mayor as a 2-year term rather than 4-year without resigning and then looking like bad politically. But I mean, if you guys are more for a 4-year, I was just thinking like in case someone wants to move up faster within the state rather than having to wait longer.
Dolly, please.
Just remind me again, I'm administrative in my head. What's the cost of elections to begin with? Because I prefer to actually extend it. I mean, if we do, you know what I mean? The cycle of elections for us is every 4 years or whatever. If we were going to change something like that, there's actually a cost involved into putting that in. And I'm more for actually extending, because particularly for Tigard, I think, like you said, historically, we'll take John. John is a born mayor, you know, because of historically. And then we have Jason, who came from council, and most of the people who in the history of Tigard really did serve. I mean, they didn't just come out of, you know, they didn't just cold call into becoming mayors or running for mayors. They did serve in positions, Karen, you know, in whatever, school boards or something. So there's experience there. But I'm concerned about the cost. I'm also concerned about the optics of PR, that when we're doing these changes, I mean, I'm getting a lot of questions. You know, the on the ground questions I get from people are, why are they doing this now? And not even a lot of people even know about it. And of course, you know, the history of why. I said, well, it's a good thing. So let's just take a look at it. So these are basic things, you know, electing mayor, stuff like that. If we make such drastic changes that are so not part of the norm, I think that might just cause a lot of commotion too. So, and I'm more concerned about the cost of making those types of changes.
Thank you, Dolly. Appreciate that. And Zachary, please.
I understand the concern with the cost and then also making too many changes that the public might not like. But I do also believe that the public might feel, because we're already thinking about getting rid of the ability for Tigard citizens to reduce, you know, costs to vote on measures that are passed through the city, right? As we talked about earlier.
I think, yes, if you're talking about like the urban renewal and the high capacity transit, there was a consideration around the cost of going to the ballot on those measures.
Yeah, so I mean, if we're already saving enough money on those measures, then I feel like we should consider at least making a faster turnover rate, because we are getting rid of that ability. So we might as well give some more leeway in some other way.
Thank you, Zachary. And Jason, please.
Does someone besides me want to answer these questions about costs? I don't know, Carol, city attorney, Councilor Shaw, John, me, any of us could answer that, but I don't know who should. But someone should, because
You have the floor if you want to answer. Otherwise, Carol's got her hand up.
Carol, do you want to answer?
Well, I was just going to say that we have elections every 2 years anyway, not for the mayor, but we are going to the ballot every 2 years anyway. And the cost really depends on whether or not it's a presidential year and which month we're doing. So we try and line it up with elections that are going to save us money. So we're kind of already doing that, but you know, frankly, we are going every 2 years.
So that's like, let's translate that a little bit. That means that really, if we are putting something on the ballot during a normal election ballot cycle, it doesn't really cost us extra money. So the reason that the initiatives and other things are issues is those are typically forced. Once they're delivered, they're forced to be on the next ballot or within a certain time frame, which often means we're paying for a special election. If we're on a 2-year cycle, those are either primary cycles or presidential election cycles, especially in November, but even in May, that's also true in Oregon. So the May elections and the November elections typically don't have a significant special cost associated with that. Staff can correct me if they think I've misstated anything.
Thank you, Jason. Appreciate that. And Karen, please.
I believe that sticking with the 4-year term balances the commitment that I would want from a candidate, but also with the citizens' ability to change the direction if they would like to. I just feel like balancing those two things, that 4 years is a sweet spot.
Thank you. It's great articulation of that balance. And Margaret, please.
Yes, I have a question. Are the mayor, the council and mayor elections, are they in November, March, or May?
They're in November.
November, okay. Then when we talk about election costs, I mean, if we had to do it and we were the only ones that did it, that's expensive.
Yes.
Very expensive. But you know, when everyone else is running, it's not a big deal, big cost.
Thanks, Margaret. Good question. And Nathan, please.
I'm also pretty settled on the 4-year term, but the other kind of balance that I'm thinking about is the balance between, unfortunately, the service that an elected official does and the campaigning that an elected official does. I don't know how much campaigning goes on for Tigard mayor, but I know that there's some, and that takes time and effort, and that's time and effort taken away from other things they could be focusing on.
Thank you, Nathan. And I've never run for mayor, but based on John's facial expression, it's a considerable time investment. All right, so there doesn't just be at least some disagreement. I just want to be really certain that we have consensus. So I think the question is, does the committee recommend retaining the mayoral term of 4 years? Yes or no? A yes would be retaining that 4-year term, and a no would change that mayoral term length. And I would love to hear a motion to vote if you feel ready.
I motion to vote.
And is there a second?
I second.
Thank you. And Carol, please. Oh, you're muted.
I seconded the motion.
Oh, no, did you want to vote yes to retain?
Oh, I'm sorry. I want to vote yes to retain.
Thank you. And Derek, please.
Yes, retain.
Jason?
Yes.
Jeanette?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
Aaron?
Yes.
Lindsay?
Yes.
Margaret?
Yes.
Nathan?
Yes.
And Zachary?
No.
The vote of 9-1, this does pass. So the group will recommend retaining the 4-year term for mayor. And that ends our discussion around mayoral selection and term length. So thank you. And Shelby, that gives you the direction that you need to fill in those blanks in the shell. Great. So our next topic, and I'll start by saying that we are going to go into breakout rooms for this discussion, unless we generally go into breakout rooms in my mind when I think there's going to be a lot of really robust conversation, so you can have it in that smaller forum. Unless folks disagree and you don't want to go to the breakout rooms, in which let me know, I am thinking that that's what we'll do for this discussion. So looking through other city charters, interestingly, there was 2 council limitations that came up that were stated directly in the charter that Tigard has in our council rules. One of those being a no interference clause that essentially said that individual councilors cannot interfere in the day-to-day work or coerce the city manager as an individual councilor, because the council is what directs the city manager. And then there is a variety of different penalties for violation of that that were in those different limitations on councilors document that I sent, including no explicit penalty, immediate removal from office, or like a due process of a majority of councilors and a public hearing in order to remove someone from office for violating that policy. The second, which showed up in Beaverton's, which was a representing the city clause, which again in Tigard city rules, which says that a councilor who votes against the majority for any given policy action has essentially the right to represent themselves and their vote and disagree publicly with the council, while also saying that this is where council is going, this is their direction. So before we go into the breakout rooms, I want to use this larger room for if there are questions or questions about those 2 clauses, how they work out, what the city council rules are, And then we'll answer those questions in this group, and then we'll send to the breakout rooms to have those more robust conversations. And Margaret, please.
Okay, again, clarification. So the representing the city is that you as a counselor make it clear that I am not speaking for myself. I'm speaking for myself and not the city in certain instances. Is that what it works out?
Yeah, I'm gonna let Shelby.
I
take
voted
that.
against XYZ and this is the reason, but this is my opinion, not the view of the city council. Okay. That's what I thought. Thank you.
Thank you. And Shelby, please clarify whatever I.
No, so I just wanted to elaborate. So a couple things. Currently, you have a copy of the ground rules. Ground rules are adopted by resolution of the council. And so they can change anytime as each council basically does their own ground rules. That's one of the introductory things that they do when they're seated as a new council is they come in, have a discussion, and then pass ground rules. So they're binding amongst themselves, but they're not binding among future councils. Secondly, on the penalties for no interference clauses, I know that some cities have an immediate removal. I think that is highly problematic. I think without a due process hearing, that would very likely be a violation of due process under the Constitution. So I would, I'm not going to sway either way, but I would suggest staying away from that one. I think there's significant legal risk with that one.
Thank you, Shelby. And Nathan, please.
I was just curious, I couldn't figure out or find if there's like a rule of thumb of what counts as interference or not interference, because just in a casual conversation, someone could say something that someone might interpret as interference, but I'm not sure how that's measured. Or, I mean, if there's a hearing, that would go into that hearing, but if there's a rule of thumb there or a precedent or anything.
It's interesting. It's something that we talked about in our internal meeting, which is that in order to press the no interference, to say that there has been a violation, you would be asking the city manager to come forward, and council are essentially their boss. So in that sense, it would need to be rather egregious, just from that political sensitivity for something to come forward. But it is definitely worth consideration of how that could play out, both positively and negatively. So thank you for bringing that up, and I look forward to hearing about your small group conversation. Jason, please.
Yeah, just, I mean, as this is being discussed and considered, for maybe a little bit more context, I will say that, and John and I both have served on councils where there were significant issues with holding individual members of the council accountable for their behavior and conduct related to the ground rules. Maybe a little less recently, but we both lived through some fairly significant situations like that. And so I guess that's the lens I'm going to be looking through this with, is partly, should this belong somewhere besides just the ground rules, because of how they're not flimsy per se, but like when we got into some situations where there was some clear, like, this isn't going to work. Like we were having John and I had a sat down with a city councilor one time that was like, you can't continue behaving like this. We will literally remove you from every committee. We will, you're not going to represent the city at these events. Like it got pretty ugly. And this is also a person who I had to restrain from physically assaulting a member of the public after a meeting. Like these are significant behavioral issues. So just think, when you're thinking about where this belongs, just think about those kind of scenarios, because that actually really has happened in Tigard in the last 10 years.
Thank you for sharing, Jason. I will say I purposely put you and John in different breakout rooms every time and then change it up, so everyone will be able to get the value of one of your perspectives. John, please.
Yeah, I won't repeat any of that, but I agree with every point of it. When somebody, let's say a layperson reads this, to me, they don't even know about the things that Jason was just talking about. if a layperson reads this, to me, they're looking at, let's say a city councilor goes into the city manager's office and says, if you don't fire the police chief right now, I'm going to fire you. And that's the kind of thing that when I read this, that we're talking about. In other words, you can't do that. Now, in the middle of a council meeting, you can say, I want you to fire the police chief, because it's in public record. And so all of these things, it's the point being is you can't do that in private, but you can actually do it in public. So that's where it gets very controversial, is you can't tell the city manager to fire somebody in private. 3 councilors can't even go do that in private, but in public you can. And that's where it gets very controversial, is if you don't want the police chief gone, you can't fire the police chief as a council. You can't put 3 votes forward to do that. You can ask the city manager to do that, and if they don't, you could remove the city manager. So that's where I think a lot of these things come in, is you can't do that. At the same time, I'll talk about one other point, and it happened to be the same person, but micromanaging staff, where we've actually removed staff members' badge availability to go into buildings, because they would go into staff members' offices and micromanage and actually tell the staff how to do their job.
Council member badges, sorry, John meant council member badges.
Yeah, council member badge. So a council member we removed their badge availability to get into the buildings of the city hall, because they would go into meetings and people's offices and basically tell them, this is how you do your job on a daily basis, or here's how I want you to do your job. And so those are the kind of things that, that to me also is interference that people need to understand happens.
Thank you, John. And Margaret, please.
Okay, I have another question again about the no interference. So when this language is drafted, and I think John brought up a good point, is it the delineation between interference of, I'm just going to go by myself and, go into somebody's office and talk to them, versus a public setting? Is that delineated in the language?
Yes, the no interference clauses had a wide range of some of the particular language in them, but all of them included a provision that said that this does not apply to a public meeting setting.
Thank you.
So that would be included in our language as well.
Thank you.
And Dolly, please.
Just logistical. When we go into breakout rooms, that goes as a black screen for the entirety during recording, correct?
It does, although because of the way things are going to work today, it'll be a little different, because Shelby and I will be kind of bopping in and out of the main room into the breakout rooms.
Well, the reason why I'm also saying that is because I just want to remind everybody that I, for one, I push our the video availability of our meetings to CPO4M, my HOA, and to my social media. Just be aware that what we discuss here also, in case we forget, is really of public access as well. So let's, stand by what we have to say. There you go.
Thank you, Dolly.
Kim, will the sheets be up on the screen? Nope.
I won't be able to share the sheet on the screen.
Okay.
So what I was going to suggest is if a couple folks can take either a screenshot of these questions or jot down some notes for themselves, that I think would be really helpful. There are really 3 questions. Should a no interference clause be included in the charter? And if so, should that penalty for violation be stated? And should the penalty, and should that include a public hearing and majority vote of council as part of that penalty? Shelby, please.
Yeah, so I just wanted to give another perspective on the significance of the no interference clause, or the significance of no interference, I guess. So under Oregon law, a person acting in the scope of their official capacity is covered by the city's insurance company in the event a lawsuit is brought. And so if a person is doing what they should be doing, the city will take care of any lawsuit against them. It's not on the person individually. our general counsel for our insurance company has advised that in the event that a city councilor causes, say, a hostile work environment by the discussions and interactions that they have with staff, because that interaction is likely to be seen as outside the scope of their official capacity, that they should not be interfering and directing staff, that if that employee were to bring a hostile work environment claim, the city would not cover that elected official. That would be the individual's own legal defense. And so just kind of highlighting that this is actually a really big deal because the structure of roles is set up for a reason. So not for or against a no interference clause, but just the importance of delineating roles and expectations around staff versus council. It is significant and it does have legal implications.
Thank you, Shelby. And I did want to reiterate that if the staff recommendation is because of due process, that if there is a violation that is associated with a no interference clause, that it should include a public hearing or some other due process. But public hearing and a majority vote of council is the most typical. And Jeanette, please.
Yeah, thank you, Shelby. You read my mind because I was going to ask if there's any legal implications for having this, and it sounds like it could help the city when it comes to a lawsuit, maybe even an individual counselor. But that's my question.
Yeah, I think it helps reinforce good behavior. I think that and clarify the expectation that it is good behavior. I don't think that having it one way or another won't help or hurt the city in litigation, but the reminder of expectations, I think, is always helpful.
And is that true also with the representing the city clause?
I think to a lot lesser extent, that's more of how council interacts amongst itself as opposed to the roles and responsibilities. So I see less legal implications with that one.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, great questions. Lindsay, please.
That was a little bit my question too, was that if it matters whether it's in the charter or not legally. It sounds like, Shelby, what you're saying is that either way with the no interference clause, that, the rogue council person could be face personal charges. The idea of putting it in the charter is that it's more likely clear to that person what expectations are and has a little bit more weight and gravitas. Is that right?
Yeah, and then if the committee decides to recommend a sanction or a penalty, that's where it would really hold the weight. And so if the committee does want a due process hearing and the potential removal from office, legally, if a counselor has to defend themselves using their own money in litigation, that doesn't impact their ability to continue to serve on council. But if they are in litigation because of their actions and they get sent to a public hearing and then voted off council as a result of their actions, that's really the teeth that the charter provision has.
Thank you. And Derek, please.
Yeah, I think my question is kind of directed at John or Jason even, because you spoke to some of the limitations of the ground rules, and it seems like you might even be suggesting that we should include it in the charter. And could you speak to, like, the final part of the ground rules suggest that, approaching the individual first, et cetera, and then, if as a last resort, putting this before the council for some sort of debate, I assume, but it's kind of vague at that point. Like, what would the next steps be? Like, did it ever get to that point?
Yeah, we had that conversation. John can pipe in too. We were both on the council at the time, and that was sort of the core issue, Derek, was what do we do when we have clear violations of the ground rules that are significantly impacting the city and the functioning of the council and our relationship with another city, and how are we going to manage around that and through that. We actually had discussions about whether we were going to bring it to a public meeting and vote on a sanction or not, and we were just shy of that, was sort of the decision that was made at the time. But it was close, and it could have gone there if things had not improved. John, I don't know if you want to add to that.
Well, the term that we always used, and this is where I think it gets really muddy, was we censured. And the term censure that we came up with could be anything from removing them from committees, removing, their ability to go to buildings. It could be their ability to, actually to remove them from the council. And so that's where it gets very tricky on what the definition of censure was. And so that's why we tried to work it out by saying, hey, you can't do this. And so when Jason said we met with them, we couldn't meet with them at the same time because that would have been 3 counselors. So Jason met with them, I met with them, because we weren't allowed to actually have 3 of us sit in the room and talk about an issue that was public related. So it was very difficult. And so even with, I don't want to use the word threatens of censure, but we basically said, if you don't clear it up, this is what's going to happen. And we got really close to a council vote. We actually did censure them, but we did not vote to remove them. But that was our next step. So, I mean, we have removed counselors from a different person that we're even not talking about now from committees when we felt that they were running the committee versus being a liaison to the committee. And that's something that we'll talk about later. Or you look at the council rules, it talks about liaison, okay? We actually had counselors that would go in and run the meeting, and they felt they were chair of that committee. We were trying to explain they're a liaison. So it got to be very difficult. So the whole hard part for me is the word censure, and maybe Shelby can talk a little bit more about that, but that's where it got very difficult. I like the latitude that we were able to use. At the same time, it would have been nice to have cut and dry to be able to tell somebody, hey, you did this, therefore this is the result.
Thank you. And I think there's an interesting intersection there too, John, with the number of counselors because of that issue that you were describing, because you couldn't have 3 because you would hit quorum. If we had more counselors, then you would have been able to avoid that concern. So just an interesting intersection with our next topic that I wanted to mention. And Jeanette, please.
Yeah, so just those are obviously egregious actions that were presented. Has there been a case and does it always have to be egregious? Because I'm a little concerned too that you could get like maybe there's a counselor somebody doesn't like and they just decide, oh, well, we've decided it's going to be egregious, even though it may not be. And so where does the political action, if I can call it that, versus the, really egregious behavior that should be monitored or taken care of, how is that defined? It looks like Shelby has an answer for that.
Well, I don't know that I have an answer. So I think, that is the purpose of the public hearing, is so that in a public setting that all members of council, whether that be 5 members or more, that everybody gets a chance to hear the evidence and to make a decision based on the evidence. And then, if it's a case that is clearly personal or other motivation, hopefully that plays out in a public setting and the public sees it for what it is. So there's never going to be a clear legal guideline as to what is egregious enough or something. That's going to be the purpose of the public hearing. To John's point, if the committee feels that removal from office is one of the penalties, I do think that needs to be expressly stated, because there is, I would say, legal doubt as to whether somebody can be removed from office by the council. As an elected member of office, it should be expressly stated in this charter if it's going to be, if that is included in the range of sanctions. So I don't think we need to include all the range of sanctions. The removal from committees, building access, all of those things are low enough that those can be handled by council on a case-by-case basis. But because of the the significance of removing a publicly elected official from the body, removal should be expressly stated if that's going to be allowed.
And Shelby, we had concluded in the situations we were describing earlier, because it was a ground rules violation and it's not in the charter, that actually probably was not a viable or realistic. It was discussed, but it was not viewed as legally viable.
Right.
Because it wasn't in the charter.
Yep.
Very interesting. I am hoping that we can still get into those breakout rooms for the more intense discussion, but Derek, please.
Just to echo Jeanette's concerns, because I really appreciate the fact that she clarified some of my own thinking, is how do we separate the political action of a person that may just simply be unpopular versus them actually interfering with the city's business? And I don't have that sorted in my head quite yet. And that is also what I was wondering.
It's a great discussion point. So these are the three questions. No interference clause. How should that penalty be distributed if or be considered within the charter if there is a no interference clause? And then should a representing the city clause be included in the charter? So you will go to breakout rooms. We've got 12 committee members here tonight, so there are going to be 6 and 6. When you get into your room, please select someone to be your recorder and to report out at the end of the conversation. After a few minutes, Shelby and I will start jumping between rooms. I've got 6:31 on my clock right now, so we're going to give, say, 25 minutes as a starting point. So we'll go until 6:55, and then we'll take it from there. Sound good, everybody? All right, let me stop sharing and have a great conversation. Oh, Shelby, you're so good. Already muted and no video. So I'm at 6:32. Let's give them until like 6:35, 6:36, and then we can start jumping in.
Sounds good.
Welcome back.
Looks like the other group wasn't.
This
quite
is just our group.
That looks like our group.
Yeah, there's a 60-second warning, so they're probably taking their 60 seconds. I just waited for a break in your conversation before hitting the button.
I opted to leave, yeah.
I just want to say I felt like the breakout rooms are really helpful, and I may not know as much historically and like background wise about all this information and like why we should vote specific ways, but I do feel like at least if I get any benefit out of this, I'm understanding more why we vote on the policies we vote too. So I also appreciate your guys' opinions a lot. And really.
Thanks, Zachary. Thanks for being here. All right, so I wasn't in the rooms when you decided who was your speakers. So we would let's say group 2. Would you like to go first?
I actually don't remember what I'm one of the recorders, but I don't remember what group we're in. One. Great.
All right, so group 2, who is your recorder?
Carol.
That's me.
Here.
Carol.
All right, go ahead.
Oh, boy. Well, we talked a lot. We do want interference clause to be in the charter, but we're really concerned. We do have concerns about it being used politically. We want to protect the city manager so that they can be a whistleblower and not worried about retaliation. We would like some specific steps for resolution, kind of a range of penalties. We don't want it, we're worried about it being misused just to get someone off council or, get rid of someone you don't like. And we're concerned about putting something in there that wouldn't stand up in court. Why put in that language, if it won't? The representing the city clause, that's more about how the council interacts with each other. And so maybe putting something in that they will adopt ground rules regarding city council conduct. Weren't really clear about what the consequences were. We asked City Attorney Rahala if we do mention that the ground rules need to be followed. Does that increase the, does that make it more legal? And she said, probably not. I mean, because it's not spelled out. So we want something in the charter that has more teeth. We want more detail. We want to stay on the side of what's legal. And there were some concerns because of the range of violations. It could be something very simple or very egregious. So we need something to be able to address the egregious stuff. So did I forget anything?
Okay, thank you, Carol. Thank you, group 2. And Lindsay for group 1.
Thank you. I think we probably had a similar conversation as group 2. I think we were leaning towards a no interference clause in the charter. We weren't necessarily all set on it. And again, that if it was included in the charter, it needed to be very clear, have guardrails, I think, as Jason described, to make sure that it wasn't weaponized, which was a term that Derek used, which I think made a lot of sense. Kind of thinking worst case scenario, how could someone turn this in and weaponize it? So kind of thinking through all that the language around it, we'd have to feel comfortable if it was going to be included in the charter. And that, yes, that that there should be a penalty for violation. And I think we felt that Jason had suggested this, and I think we all agreed that it really should be up to the council what that penalty was, because there's a lot of different scenarios in what that violation would look like. So that really gives it back to the council to decide what the best course of action is, as long as there was a unanimous vote to make sure that we're a really united front again. So this couldn't be used to weaponize against someone. We didn't get a lot of time talking about representing the city clause in the charter because I don't think we felt quite as strongly about it. Could be content with leaving that to be covered in the ground rules, that it wasn't as much of a concern. So I would just ask anyone from my group to add anything to that I might have left out.
Jason, please.
Just to be clear about the unanimous vote, that was actually not just to determine what the penalty was, but also to determine whether there'd been a violation. So essentially the whole decision-making process to actually bring, and I don't know if conviction is the right word, but whatever the determination of the outcome is, all had to be, and this is also to help protect it from being weaponized politically. We think it should require a unanimous vote of the rest of the council.
Great clarification. Thank you.
Great. So let me see if my very quick note taking does all of your great work justice. So I see a lot of similarities between the two conversations. Karen, please go ahead.
I was just curious from group one, Jason, what you were just describing, are you actually saying there could be two votes then? Like a first vote of yes, something actually really happened, and a unanimous vote for that. And then separately, another, after a hearing, a vote for the punishment or the.
We hadn't gotten into a ton of detail. We just concluded that whatever decisions were being made on this front, whatever those are, would all need to be unanimous votes. I think group one, does that, I think that accurately represents what we talked about.
I would agree, Jason. I think that does.
Yeah, I see Derek gave a thumbs up. So yes, a lot of commonality between both groups. It looks like there is a lot of support for including a no interference clause, but concerns about weaponization and misuse from both groups, which yes, there's a lot of ways that can be misused by extraordinarily bad actors. So seeing requirements on both sides, wanting to protect the city manager, and then asking for significant guardrails, and then the concrete suggestion of requiring a unanimous vote of council as one of those guardrails. And then the concerns that it is not legally defensible. So I think that this provides really good direction for staff to take this and try to draft something and bring it back to the group that meets your needs. So I would ask that for this group this evening for a recommendation to be a recommendation to go forward with drafting a no interference clause with this direction in mind. Does anyone feel strongly against the no interference clause and not want us to move forward with starting to figure out that
clear
language?
on what's going to happen with the whole representing the city part, since there was kind of less direction there?
Yeah, I was just taking them one at a time. It's two separate clauses. So we're just dealing with the no interference and then we can go on to representing the city. Yep. So does that sound like a reasonable recommendation to this group for the no interference clause? Consensus around, let's take it. Shelby and I will go mine the other charters and find some of the best language that we can. We'll have the best no interference clause. Okay, great. So representing the city, I understand that group one didn't get as much time to discuss it in the breakouts. So let's have that here. It sounded like from group two, The suggestion was not to necessarily include a representing the city clause in the charter, but to require ground rules about city council behavior, which is a little different than group one, who did not feel strongly, at least in the service level conversation, and was content to leave it to ground rules. And then an outstanding question would be, are there any consequences for violation of ground rules? Which is an interesting question that I would like to leave to this group. So two questions. Does it need to be included at all? And it seems like that answer is no, but should there be a clause requiring counselors to adhere to ground rules? And if so, should there be a penalty associated with that? So I will leave that to anyone who'd like to offer their opinion. Karen, please.
I was someone who did want to expand in the ground rules what next steps for resolution might be, and actually listing out what the possibilities might be for the council to consider.
As in what penalties could exist for violation of ground rules?
Yes,
And listing those in the charter?
not in the charter, but in the ground rules.
Oh, in the ground rules themselves. Okay, so that's a different type of recommendation. Does anyone feel very strongly about including a clause that requires council to have ground rules? Shall we, please?
So if it makes any difference, I also want to point out that we have a provision in our code right now that requires ground rules. So it's chapter 2.44 of our Tigard Municipal Code. And it does say that council ground rules will govern proceedings of the council where they do not conflict with statutory provisions. Council ground rules will include a code of conduct, and they shall be passed by resolution of council. And then it says the mayor or a member of council may be subject to a council resolution of censure for misconduct, non-performance of duty, and failure to obey the laws of the federal, state, and local governments. So that is what we currently have in our code right now. So that's in ordinance about ground rules.
Thank you, Shelby. Also really fast looking up that code. Appreciate that. Dolly, please go ahead.
Oh, Shelby kind of touched on that, and I will reiterate what I said earlier, that I think it's good to mention that there should always be ground rules. However, the ground rules, of course, get changed depending on what the council is, and they get to do that. And hearing from Jeanette that it took them an entire day to write theirs is an indication of what the need is. And I will repeat that even myself, for example, I have witnessed, just from being involved, maybe not anything, I liken it to being on a board. For example, I was recently a chairperson of a board that was even nonprofit, and we had to, things are evolving, things are changing. Even the rules of just political correctness are changing. So I think moving forward, the basic rule, or for lack of a better term, should be included in the charter, but the details of how they should be lined up can be changed by the council as it is relevant to the times.
Yeah.
I think that's it. Yeah.
Thank you, Dolly. Jason, please.
I'm thinking maybe we should just take what's already in the code and put it in the charter or something similar. Shelby, is there a reason why that couldn't or shouldn't just be codified to say, hey, we know that having ground rules is a best practice. And frankly, there's never going to be a world in which that's not the case. I mean, I'll just be honest, this is known as a best practice in the industry. And we could just say both the ground rules, the council's, whatever the language says, and basically they're going to call out what the penalties are for non-compliance with them, and the council will enforce them or whatever. I mean, I guess I'm curious, Shelby, any reason why not to just use similar language and move it from ordinance and put it into the charter?
Nope, we can definitely do that. The one concern would be if there is anything that would be a penalty of removal from office, that would have to be expressly spelled out in the charter. We couldn't defer to another document, but it doesn't sound like that's the case. So yeah, we could basically just move it.
I was afraid you were going to say that, and I was kind of debating on that in my own head. I don't have a strong opinion either way. I get it. In some prior situations, it would have been nice to have maybe that threat, even if it wasn't going to be used, but it's probably more problematic than it's worth. I don't know what to say.
Thanks, Jason. And Jeanette, please.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I was just going to mention, because it is in the chapter and because we did spend time on it, that's why we spent time on it, because we thought it was very important to get it right. So I think because it's already in the chapter 2.44, it makes sense not to duplicate it in the charter, but I could go either way. But I was a little concerned about the penalty aspect. So perhaps with ease, it just makes sense for chapter, but recognizing Dolly, your point.
Yeah, and we did have a distinction. We talked about this, I think, towards the beginning about code and charter. And so the charter is those things that are so important, so necessary that they want them to be so cemented that they they cannot be easily changed, versus the code, which cannot be easily changed, but can be changed easier than a charter can be. So does anyone feel strongly that the language in the code is not sufficient and it should be moved into the charter, knowing now what's in the code? John, please.
I actually like the idea of moving it. To me, I read those, and Jeanette, nothing against the 4 pages you guys came up with, but I was telling our group, we had 7 pages and we whittled it down to 6 in 2013. So, but included in our document was the actual censure language. So it's interesting how you have one document that you tell the public about and another one that somebody would have to, nobody goes in to read the ordinances, so they wouldn't even know what it said. Where our document, it was sort of all there for everybody, and it says in there, hey, we can censure somebody. So I guess it's different ways of looking at it. But I wouldn't mind seeing it in the charter. My whole worry, and I said this to my group, was that putting anything in the charter has to be something that we can live with for 10 or 20 years, until we look at it again. So it has to be very, saying that, yeah, we should have it. And I think that's a good rule, because I agree with Jason. It's best practice and something we want to do. So I don't really have a problem with putting it in there. I think nobody knows to look there. Nobody knows it's even there if it's an ordinance.
Thank you, John. So the question, I think, as it stands is, does the committee recommend moving the ground rules language from the code into the charter? That would be the question and the vote, if we chose to have that tonight. If anyone would like to make that motion.
I'll make the motion since I made the suggestion. I move that we move the language in currently in ordinance into the charter, probably with some revisions.
Yeah. Is there a second?
Second.
I have a question.
Yes, please.
So the 2 pages that we have, that language will be moved into charter?
No, the code that requires the council to create ground rules and sets, I think, some penalty around censure, that would be moved.
Got it. Okay, that changes. Oh yeah, okay, that's good. Thank you.
So making a little quick slide. So we have very clear. Okay, so does the committee recommend moving the code language about ground rules into the charter? A yes vote would vote to move that language into the charter. A no vote would say do not move language. And Karen, please.
I just wanted to double check that it could be modified, right? That because I don't want just the censure thing in there. That doesn't do anything. If we're going to put a violation, I want to put a violation.
We'll include some modifications. Okay, it was moved and seconded, so I'm gonna go ahead and do our vote. Carol Krager,
Yes.
Derek Lawson,
Yes.
Jason Snyder,
Yes.
Jeanette Shaw,
Sure. Not necessary, but sure.
thank you. John Cook,
Yes.
Aaron Emerson,
Yes.
Lindsay Murphy,
Yes.
Margaret Doherty,
Yes.
Nathan Jackson,
Yes.
and Zachary Claremont.
Yeah.
On a vote of 10-0, we will make some modifications to language that is currently in the code and move that language into the charter. And with that, it is 7:27, and I couldn't have planned that better. And so we're going to go ahead and break for the evening. Thank you all. We got through a lot of topics. We set mayoral powers, we set mayoral term length, selection, talked about limitations on counselors, and going into next meeting, we're going to be talking about the numbers of counselors, counselor selection, and we may even get into term limits. So that will be next Monday. I'm looking forward to seeing you again. In between now and then, if you do have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me and Shelby. Have a great night.
Thank you.
Thank you. You too. Bye.
Bye.